Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by United States Senator Pat Toomey of the great state of Pennsylvania. I say that always haltingly because Steelers are located there. Senator Toomey, welcome back.
Hugh, thanks for having me. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you. I want to talk reconciliation primarily with you, but first your reaction to the killing of Zawahiri after, we've been looking for him since 1998 in the embassy bombing.
Yeah, we have, and obviously it's very good news for the United States and for the free world generally. This guy was a cold-blooded killer, and his ambition was to kill more Americans, and so disruption around the world. Frankly, I'm pleasantly surprised that we retained the ability to do this in Afghanistan despite our departure. So I think it's very good news.
All right. Now, Senator, I agree. I think we can also hold two thoughts, that the Afghan withdrawal was a debacle, and it is very good news. Those are
Absolutely.
Not contradictory.
Correct.
Senator, let's turn to the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which is not about inflation, reduces nothing. It raises taxes and spending, and isn't an action. It's actually a retreat and a collapse by Senator Manchin. What do you make of this monster?
It's a total disaster. And, I got to tell you, I'm very friendly with Joe Manchin. I like Joe. I've worked with Joe. He's a good guy. But I really feel like he's been taken to the cleaners here. I mean, you look at this. We've got this big tax increase, which is going to do a lot of damage. I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about the details there. They're going to put price controls on prescription drugs and, really impede innovation for new life-saving medicines. And we're going to take that money and we're going to use it for corporate welfare for green energy and subsidies for affluent Americans to buy Obamacare. It's going to do nothing to improve our deficit. It's going to make inflation worse. It's going to make our economy weaker. In return for all this, Joe gets a promise of permitting reform, which, by the way, we were supposed to have done that in the infrastructure bill. But now we're really going to do it, apparently. But we haven't seen any text. We haven't seen the language. And I sure haven't seen the 10 Democrats that are signed up to vote with Joe on that. So this just looks like a terrible combination to me, Hugh.
Yeah, I have no MRI into his motivations. I'm just hoping that those motivations do not move Senator Sinema away from common sense. I hope, in fact, this pushes her towards converting her party identification, because the left wing's still going to go after her in a primary, but she could be the Republican nominee. Have you talked to her yet about this? Because she's the only thing that stands between America and this nightmare. And it's really a nightmare. Can I pause for a moment? I was a CHIPS Act supporter, but we just gave the semiconductor industry, for strategic reasons, a whole billions of dollars, and we're going to take it back with the other hand. It's absolutely insane.
Well, on the tax side, I think one of the most constructive elements we had was the provision in our corporate code that allowed the full expensing of capital expenditures in the year in which the expense occurred. So if you make $1 billion and you plow all of that back into your business, expanding your plant, buying new equipment, also that you can expand capacity, hire more workers, under financial accounting rules, you can only deduct a small portion of that in the year in which you incur that cost, and the rest in little slices over many years to come. And we said, no, you actually laid out the cash now. You should be able to take the deduction now. You won't be able to also take deductions in the future on it, but take it now. The net effect of that, Hugh, is we lowered the cost of making capital expenditures. We saw a rise in capital expenditures. That's how you get productivity growth. That's why pre-COVID we had strong wage growth. Wages were growing faster than inflation, not the other way around like we have today. And that, right, this really constructive element, that's what they're blowing up. This is mostly a tax increase on manufacturers who invest in their business. That's most.
And they will pass it on. If they survive, they will pass it on to the people who buy their products.
Well, it'll be some combination of higher prices to consumers, lower compensation to their employees, and simply less growth. They'll be able to do less of the capital expenditures that is the source of growth. So at every level that you look at this, it's terrible policy. By the way, corporate tax revenue is at a record high, at a unusually well above average high as a percentage of our income. It's not as though corporations aren't paying taxes. It's just maddening.
Have you talked to Senator Sinema yet?
Not about this provision. No, not about this.
Okay.
And so I'm not sure where she is. She has been conspicuously silent. So I do intend to hold her.
I saw your colleague, Senator Blunt, not long ago. I didn't have a chance. This had not happened, or I would have advised him to get the conference together and agree on a strategy for reconciliation. I hate Voterama. I think it's an old tactic to put forward 100,000 amendments and get symbolic votes that no one pays attention to. I think the new tactics would be to zone in on 3 or 4 amendments that matter. And my suggestions, they'll be in the Post today, is funding the Navy Undersea Service with real money that's lockboxed away, and to enforce cuts on federal funding for schools if they're teaching divisive subjects K through 8, and to fund private public school construction of charter schools, and then finally to fund nuclear power plants of the new generation, the kind Bill Gates supports and I support, and then just make that the GOP agenda and just dare Democrats to vote against 4 70-30 issues and then try and strip them out at the end. Do you think there's a chance of getting the Republican conference to focus and execute on Voterama?
Well, this has been the topic of conversation every day at our lunches now, and there are a lot of competing ideas. I think the ideas you've laid out are very worthy of consideration. I can tell you there are some other good ideas as well. I don't think this is going to be the usual Voterama, which I agree with you, have been 90-something% waste of time. I think this is going to be a little more constructive, but we're not there yet in terms of having an agreed-upon strategy. And as you might imagine, it's a little challenging to get 50 senators to agree to much of anything. So, but we are working on it every day.
I want to explain to people and then have you confirm and expand on. If the Democrats get Sinema, they introduce a reconciliation bill. They got the 50 votes plus the vice president goes on the floor. Voterama allows all sorts of amendments, which have usually been symbolic, and they vote yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, and people vote against gun control, for gun control. They go through all sorts of things, for abortion rights, against abortion rights. At the end, a wraparound amendment comes back to restore the original bill with those amendments that Democrats insist on having. Have I described it accurately, Senator?
Except I think there's one slight nuance that you left out. I know you know this, but I would just spell it out as clear as I can. The wraparound bill at the end, the main purpose it serves is to strip out all amendments that passed, because the Democrats don't want any amendments that passed. You probably intended to
I did. I intend to force them to make the wraparound amendment include, by purposes of focusing the Republicans. I mean, if you guys explain it at the beginning and say, we're only going for 3 or 4 amendments, and we want them in the wraparound amendment, you've got to explain that to the country so they know that's really the agenda.
Well, and what we've got to do is expose the hypocrisy of anybody that votes for the amendment when it is offered and then votes to strip it out in the wraparound amendment to make it go away. I mean, you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, Maggie Hassan, Raphael Warnock, Mark Kelly, all of the Democrats who say they are for green energy, if they don't vote for nuclear power plant, they're not really for a serious climate change agenda.
Just because it's the only reliable source of zero CO2 energy?
Yeah, and they're much, and you're from Pennsylvania, 3 Mile Island, right? Yeah. Maybe the hardest place in the world to build a new nuclear plant would be Pennsylvania, but these are 5th-generation reactors. They're very safe.
Totally. No, there's no question about it, and they're so reliable, and they can handle the base load at 24/7, 365. There's no question about it.
So, Senator, I want to switch to politics. Can Dr. Oz win the Keystone State?
He certainly can. No question about it. Dr. Oz is actually quite a good candidate. He's a very smart guy, very accomplished guy, very successful in multiple careers, and he has the humility, despite that success, to recognize that, he's learning his way through this process. This is his first run for political office. John Fetterman is so far out of the mainstream of America or Pennsylvania. I mean, maybe he could run in Vermont, but he's a Bernie Sanders socialist Democrat advocating Medicare for all and all kinds of, everything in the Green New Deal. He's as far left as they come in the Democratic spectrum, and that's not where Pennsylvania is. So I think we should have expected, I did expect, that Oz would be behind initially after the primary. He had $20 million of attack ads spent against him, and John Fetterman had none. So sure, that did some damage, but most of that is damage done to Republicans. That was the targeted audience. And the Republicans are going to come home to Oz. No Republicans are going to vote for John Fetterman. And as Republicans come home to Oz, we're going to see this race tighten right up. Fetterman, as you probably know, is unable to campaign. I think that is going to be a problem for him at some point, probably soon. And I think we win in a close race, in part because Oz is a very good candidate, in part because we're in a good environment.
I'm on in Pennsylvania from Scranton to Pittsburgh, all over the state, and I will be hammering on John Fetterman. He makes Bernie Sanders look serious.
Yeah.
And that is all I need to say about it. Now, Senator Toomey, I got to ask you, years ago, when Rick Santorum was running for re-election his last campaign that he lost, I had urged him, I wish you don't run for re-election, just run for president. He did that years later and upset in Iowa. He won Iowa, beat Mitt Romney in Iowa.
Right.
Is Pat Toomey thinking about running for president at all?
No, not at all. I can assure you of that, Hugh. No, I think this is the end of politics for me. I've been so grateful and fortunate to have this chance to serve Pennsylvania. But it'll be 12 years in the Senate. I had served 6 years prior to that in the House, 18 years in public office. That's enough for me. I've always been a believer in term limits and turning things over. I always figured I'd serve probably two terms. I've been fortunate enough to do that. I'll be moving on to the private sector. I don't know what that looks like yet, Hugh, but I've got 5 more months here. I'm going to run through the tape, accomplish everything I can, and then I'll figure out what's next for me.
Senator, you and Rob Portman are two of our workhorses. I mean, you are two of the guys that get stuff done. Who's going to step up and take that job? And by that job, I don't mean a particular ideological approach. I mean a particular Senate approach, which is you're not out there bashing and crashing. You're out there trying to get legislation written and passed.
You know, there's a lot of guys that are going to that have actually a good track record in that regard and will continue. You know, I think of Dan Sullivan from Alaska as a real workhorse, a really smart guy who's just...
Shelley Moore Capito, Susan Collins.
Shelley's terrific. Susan is one of the best senators. She and I disagree on many substantive policies, but she's a terrific lady, works so hard, finds common ground. She'll be getting things done. Tim Scott, I think, you know, everybody loves Tim, and it does matter if people like working with you, and people like working with Tim Scott. And he'll be a very productive guy. He'll take over as chairman of the Senate Banking Committee if we're in the majority. So I think we'll see a lot of folks on the stage getting some really good things done.
Last quick question. Do you have any preferences for the 2024 nominee for the party for which you have devoted a lot of your adult life?
I haven't made a pick of who I'm for, Hugh. I'm going to watch this emerge. I do think we will have a competitive primary, whether or not Donald Trump decides to run for re-election. I don't know what he'll do. But I'll be watching to see. You know, I've got some colleagues who are eyeing it, as you know very well. Of course, there are governors who are looking at this. So I think we'll have some candidates to choose from, but I'm going to wait and see what that looks like.
Last quick, will you be out on the campaign trail with Dr. Oz?
If he wants me to, I will.
And that's like, he's got an open invitation here because we got to win that state. Pat Toomey, thank you. Keep coming back even when you're in the private sector like Rick has. I appreciate your service, and thank you for joining me this morning.
Thanks for having me, Hugh.